In the 1990s, a close-knit immigrant community was terrorized by one of its own. Those who turned to the police for help found themselves threatened or killed. Despite the risk, two men refused to back down. Their testimony could help end the killing if the FBI got close enough to uncover one man's deadly business.
Many immigrants escape the poverty of India to start new lives in the United States. Most dream of a better life for their families. One twisted the American dream into a nightmare. When people started turning up dead in New York's Indian community, law enforcement struggled to link fraud and murder to one powerful man. I'm Jim Kallstrom, former head of the FBI's New York office. When the promise of the American dream was shattered by murder and corruption, the FBI provided hope to those people who had seen their lives and families torn apart.
July 9th, 1995. Gas station attendant Kulwant Singh commuted to a gas station in the Bronx to work the late shift. Less than a year earlier, he had arrived in New York from a poor town in India, hoping to make a better life for himself and his family. That night, he disappeared. In October, the missing man's brother, Manmohan Singh, traveled to the U.S. to find him. He hadn't heard from his brother in months. It wasn't like him not to write or call. He began his search in Queens at the address of one of his brother's friends. His name was Satyendra Singh. His family was from the same village as the missing attendants. Although this friend had the same last name, he was not related. Like many members of the Sikh religion, Satyendra took the surname Singh, which means lion in the Punjabi language. Satyendra said a missing persons report had been filed, but police had found no trace of his friend. He advised the new arrival to be careful who he talked to. Searching for the brother would be dangerous. Manmohan visited the gas station in the Bronx where his brother had worked. He spoke to an attendant, but the man was afraid to respond.
My brother's missing. I'm sorry. I'm looking for my brother. Have you seen him?
His supervisor made it clear that no one should be asking questions. The employee was instructed to keep quiet. But Manmohan was persistent and convinced the attendant to meet him at a diner a few days later.
I can only be here for a few minutes. I know you're looking for him.
The attendant said the missing brother had been accused of stealing from the gas station.
And he was coming in to cover.
Whether or not the allegations were true, they had made the station's owner angry. The attendant believed Manmohan's brother had been kidnapped and probably killed. By March of 1997, A year and a half after his brother's abduction, Manmohan took a job at a gas station in New York. He worked nights so he could spend his days secretly gathering information. He believed he knew who was responsible and was ready to go to the police.
Yeah, I need some oil.
Then, on the night of March 16, 1997, he was silenced. Brooklyn North homicide detectives received a call from a customer who found the body.
105, 1025.
They photographed the crime scene to record its condition, then gathered evidence. They collected 2 shell casings from a 9mm Ruger. Detectives found the register had been robbed, but were surprised that the thief had left some cash behind. Police also found no fingerprints. Detective Tony Brazzata concluded that robbery was not the prime motive.
We examined the scene, and it looked like it was a typical gas station robbery at the beginning, but then examining the scene thoroughly, it seemed that it was more like an assassination, or this person was a target because he was shot very close range behind the head, and he was on his knees.
Detectives visited the Sikh temple where the funeral was being held. They knew this immigrant community was wary of outsiders, but hoped to find friends of the victim willing to talk.
Good, how you doing?
Satyendra Singh stepped forward. He told detectives that he knew the slain man.
Okay.
Detectives explained that without cooperation, the killer would likely go free.
Okay. Yep, very good.
Although he knew he was jeopardizing his own safety, he promised to meet with detectives and help them in any way he could. The following day, Satyendra Singh came to the police station as promised.
Yes, sir.
He brought with him another witness, Sarvjit, who was also willing to talk. They told detectives they believed a wealthy and powerful Indian man named Dhinsa had ordered the murder of their friend, as well as the abduction of their friend's brother. Dhinsa was a corrupt and ruthless businessman who was well known in the Sikh community. Like many others, he had come to the U.S. from India in the mid-1980s with only a few dollars in his pocket. But his story was different than most. He had amassed an empire of more than 50 gas stations in and around New York City.
And which was common with all the...
The witnesses knew several of Dhinsa's employees and explained to Detective Teddy Braun that the millionaire would stop at nothing to protect his business.
His whole thing was fear. He used the fear tactic that he had this community petrified of him. I mean, to the point where he could walk in and do something in front of hundreds of people and no one's gonna say nothing.
Police also learned that Dhinsa was no stranger to crime. His record included convictions for felony assault, kidnapping, robbery, gas pump fraud, and weapons possession. He'd served time, but always managed to get back on the street to run his mafia-style operation. Within the Sikh community, Dhinsa was known as the Indian Godfather. The witnesses said Dhinsa's empire was a family affair, with Dhinsa's brother a member of the inner circle and an enforcer for the organization. Sarvjit had seen for himself just how ruthless the brother could be. In 1993, outside a Queens restaurant, the informant witnessed Dhinsa's brother arguing with a man. The disagreement ended with Dhinsa's brother shooting him at close range. Sarvjit rushed to the victim's side, but it was too late. Dhinsa's brother was spirited out of the country to India. He was never captured. The witnesses now told the detectives that they'd heard the brother would soon be returning to America. They were risking their lives talking to police, but they couldn't let the violence continue.
Yes, sir.
Both promised to report when Dhinsa's brother arrived.
He's going to be coming back to the United States because Dhinsa's company was getting so big that Dhinsa needed another hand. And Dhinsa was the type of person where he'd rather have family hands-on than outsiders when it came to his money.
True to their word, in May of 1997, the witnesses told police that Dhinsa's brother was back in New York. Police set up outside the warehouse of Dhinsa's headquarters in Brooklyn, waiting for his brother to arrive.
In front is clear.
Both witnesses were present to assist police with identifying the murder suspect.
You have a possible target, stand by.
Armed with an arrest warrant, police surrounded the building and cordoned off all entrances, including the back doors of the warehouse. From the surveillance van, Satyendra confirmed that it was Dhinsa's brother heading for the front door.
We have a target entering the building.
Moments later, officers reported that shots were fired inside the building. They held their posts, waiting for orders.
Ready? We're going in. Let's go.
Officers forcibly entered the front of the building. 3 men raced out the back door into the hands of police. The men were Dhinsa's brother, his cousin, and his nephew. All 3 were arrested. Quickly securing a search warrant, police confiscated firearms, 7 pistols, a shotgun, and a silenced machine gun. As they loaded the contraband into a police car, Dhinsa himself arrived at the scene. He protested the seizure, claiming that the building and guns were his property. But the guns were illegal. Police arrested him on weapons possession charges. They took him to the 112th precinct, where Dhinsa was booked and fingerprinted. Police pressured him to cooperate. They had 2 witnesses who would testify against him and his brother for murder. Insisting he was innocent, he refused to talk. Dhinsa was held in the Brooklyn Correctional Facility awaiting a bail hearing. But incarceration did not prevent the murder suspect from running his empire. Speaking in Punjabi so guards couldn't understand him, he coerced employees and acquaintances to find out who dared to testify against him and his brother. Besides witness statements, police had little other evidence. Dhinsa would be out on bail shortly. If he discovered the identity of the witnesses, they might not testify. Then, the murder and weapons charges against the brothers would have to be dropped. In May 1997, New York City police arrested 2 East Indian brothers who had been terrorizing their immigrant community for years. Except for the statements of 2 witnesses, investigators had little evidence against them. But they believed that Dhinsa was the ringleader and that he had ordered 2 murders and a kidnapping. Dhinsa had posted bail on May 4th, 1997, just days after his arrest. But his brother remained held on a murder charge in New York City's Rikers Island prison. Through informants, Dhinsa had learned the identity of the 2 witnesses against him. If they continued to cooperate with the police, he, his brother, and his multi-million-dollar gas station empire would be in jeopardy.
Okay, tell me a little bit more.
One of the witnesses, Satyendra Singh, was close with several employees of the suspected murderer. He knew a great deal about how Dhinsa ran his $60 million gas station chain. He said that Dhinsa rigged pumps, skimmed profits, and ordered people abducted if they
How much
talked.
did you know about Dhinsa, what you told?
Detectives believed the information was compelling enough to seek an indictment. In early June of 1997, investigators met with the assistant U.S. attorney to explore Dhinsa's illegal activities. NYPD detective Teddy Braun explained how Dhinsa's pump rigging scheme worked.
Dhinsa owned like 53 gas stations, and he had this unique skimming system. And what it did was, it regulated the amount of gas that was pumped into a consumer's vehicle. So if you would have went in and asked for $10 worth of gas, he'd be able to set up that machine where it can give you 80%, 90%, whatever percent that he wanted to give you, and the rest would be saved.
Assistant U.S. Attorney Ben Campbell learned that not only was Dhinsa's empire corrupt, it was extensive.
The NYPD informed us that Dhinsa had, among other things, an organization built around pump fraud, basically ripping off customers at his gasoline stations throughout the New York and New Jersey area, by which he generated millions of dollars in income. That he protected that pump fraud activity through a pattern of violent crime, including murder.
On June 18th, just as the federal investigation was beginning, witness Satyendra Singh was shot to death in Queens. It was the day before Dhinsa's brother, suspected of murder, was scheduled to attend a hearing. At the crime scene, a neighbor told police he had witnessed the crime. He had been outside at the top of his stoop when the shooting took place. Since his apartment lacked air conditioning, he was watching a Mets game on his front porch. He was distracted by what appeared to be a traffic dispute. The neighbor described the shooter as a tall African-American male, but he never saw his face. The slain man's cousin was sitting beside his relative in the car when he was killed. The cousin told police it had all happened so fast. He was too shaken to remember any details. Forensic technicians photographed the scene. They collected shells that had been fired from a 9mm handgun. No other physical evidence was found. Nothing to prove that Dhinsa was responsible. Investigators believe that Dhinsa would continue to use any means necessary to protect his millions. They needed some way to stop him. NYPD detectives turned to Assistant U.S. Attorney Ben Campbell for guidance. He would refocus the investigation to take advantage of the federal RICO statute, the Racketeering Influence and Corrupt Organizations Act, a law used to prosecute organized crime.
This looked like, had all the hallmarks of a racketeering prosecution. It had an organization with leadership, it had racketeering activity which generated income, and it had a pattern of criminal activity which spanned several years, almost a decade.
This would widen the scope of the investigation considerably. The Assistant U.S. Attorney called on the FBI for help. Special Agent in charge Kevin Donovan from the FBI's New York field office worked the case.
The FBI was planning on conducting a traditional organized crime investigation that would focus on development of cooperating witnesses, use of cooperating witnesses, review of records, and search warrants to focus on the multiple acts of violence and the multiple acts of fraud.
That would not be easy. In order to develop new witnesses, agents would have to ensure the safety of those who came forward.
As long as Dhinsa Singh was able to intimidate witnesses through violence, threats of violence, and homicides, our investigation would be very limited. We needed to make sure that no other individuals who would cooperate with us would be hurt by Dhinsa Singh.
News of the most recent killing spread quickly through the Sikh community. The other witness, Sarvjit, and his family prepared to leave town. Investigators pleaded with him to allow the FBI to place him under protective custody. But he insisted on taking his wife and 2 small children away from New York. Despite investigators' best efforts, Dhinsa had intimidated another witness. To the Sikh community, the police and the FBI seemed powerless to protect them. In the summer of 1997, the FBI was on the trail of a violent businessman named Dhinsa. Investigators believed he had already killed 2 men, kidnapped a third, and scared another out of New York. They needed an informant close to Dhinsa to get enough evidence to arrest him.
I will get back to you.
But Special Agent in Charge Kevin Donovan found that Dhinsa was well protected.
The major hurdle that the FBI and the New York City Police Department had to overcome was an inability to develop cooperating witnesses and informants early on due to language difficulties and due to the fact that most of the individuals who worked at City Gas Corporation were not willing to come forward because of Dhinsa Singh's threats of violence and his acts of violence that were well known throughout the community.
Dhinsa now threatened the life of another member of the Sikh community. Balwant Singh was close friends with the witness who had fled the city with his family. The man was terrified. Dhinsa had come after him to find the one remaining witness. He remained holed up in his apartment with his wife and daughter for 3 days before he finally called police. He reached the Queens Homicide Unit, which was investigating the murder of Satinderjit Singh, a witness against Dhinsa. Balwant told police that he had attended the slain man's funeral. There he was approached by one of Dhinsa's men. He asked Balwant where the other witness was hiding. Dhinsa wanted to discuss the witness's testimony face to face. Balwant refused to tell him anything. But now he feared for his own life. Police told him that they would discuss the possibility of providing him and his family with protective custody. 2 detectives would be right over. Since the funeral, he had been ignoring the demands of the construction company he owned.
Mr. Singh, please.
Hello?
Yes, Mr. Singh. Need you
Yeah.
down here at the office.
When the company called, he agreed to run an urgent errand. He left his frightened family, promising he'd return as soon as he could. He knew Dhinsa's reputation. It would be difficult to avoid him for very long. Just minutes after pulling out, the man noticed a sedan that seemed to be following him. It was Dhinsa. Balwant didn't want to take any chances, so he returned home. Dhinsa sped away. As detectives headed for Balwant's apartment, they received a page. It was a coded message from their supervisor, asking them to call in immediately. Lacking a cell phone, they stopped to make the urgent call. While the detective was on the phone, he noticed an Indian man watching him closely from a car. He decided to investigate. The detectives asked the driver for his license and registration. It was Dhinsa.
Mind stepping at, sir?
When detectives asked to search his car, he agreed. Inside, they found some gas receipts. In the trunk, detectives also found electronic gauges for gas pumps. Dhinsa possessed nothing that was illegal. Since there was no outstanding warrant for his arrest, detectives let him go. The detectives were called away on an emergency. They never made it to the informant's home that day. The next morning, the man's frightened wife called police. Her husband had taken refuge in a friend's gas station. He waited anxiously for them to arrive and was relieved to see them pull up. His wife and daughter were picked up moments later. That evening, the family was taken to an undisclosed hotel outside of New York. The family would hide there under police protection until Dhinsa could be arrested. Detectives informed Balwant that they had run into Dhinsa near his neighborhood. They asked if he could verify the man's identity from a photo.
Yeah, this is Mr. Dhinsa.
Balwant identified him instantly. Investigators had one more witness in their case against the deadly businessman, but they still lacked sufficient evidence to make an arrest. In July of 1997, FBI agents and NYPD detectives believed gas station mogul Dhinsa was the man behind the murders of 2 Indian immigrants and the disappearance of a third. Investigators had little evidence to prove their theory, and Dhinsa's intimidation had silenced most witnesses. But a few among the community were tired of living in fear. At the end of July, Brooklyn North homicide detective Teddy Braun interviewed a source close to Dhinsa.
During the interview with the confidential informant, my partner Tony Pizzata came across a name Marvin, who was linked as Dhinsa Singh's strong arm.
The man's full name was Marvin Dodson. He was a 35-year-old African-American male. Detectives discovered that he had an arrest record for illegal firearms.
Any of these men look familiar?
They showed a photo lineup to the cousin of the slain witness who was in the car when the shooting occurred.
You recognize any of these men?
He immediately identified Dodson as the gunman. Detective Anthony Brizada now began searching for Marvin Dodson.
Okay.
My partner and myself put together a list of various locations, like about 6 or 8 locations where he hung out, his residence, his relatives.
On July 4th, 1997, police cornered Dodson in a Queens neighborhood.
Marvin Dodson! Turn off your ignition! Throw your keys out of the window now! Do it! Step out of the car, sir!
They arrested him and took him to the station.
Go to the door, do it! Stop!
Dodson agreed to testify against Dhinsa in return for a lighter sentence. On Sunday morning, July 6, 1997, Dodson and his attorney met with Queens homicide detectives, the assistant U.S. attorney, and the FBI. Dodson confessed that he had been hired by Dhinsa for the murder. Dodson said the plan to kill one of the witnesses began on May 18, 1997. At the time, Dhinsa had just been released on bail. Dodson would be the trigger man, hired to kill the witness scheduled to testify against Dhinsa and his brother. First, they picked up the murder weapon, a 9mm Ruger. The same caliber of shell casings were later collected at the crime scene. Dodson told investigators that Dhinsa then ordered him to hire a driver for the hit.
Go ahead and tell us a story.
Dhinsa's next move was to conduct surveillance of the witnesses. Assistant U.S. Attorney Ben Campbell recalls that Dhinsa provided Dodson with all the information he'd needed to get to Satyendra Singh.
He gave Mr. Dodson the address where Satyendra Singh lived, the license plate number to his vehicle, and instructed Mr. Dodson to watch Satyendra Singh and kill him at the first opportunity.
What do you do with the gun?
On June 18, 1997, Dodson received a phone call from Dhinsa. His boss told him that the witness needed to be dead before nightfall. Dhinsa's brother's hearing was the following day. The hit would send a message to everyone who considered testifying. Dodson said that he and his driver, Walter Jazz Samuels, met Dhinsa at one of his gas stations. Dhinsa provided them with a white van. They watched Satyendra house until he came out. He was with his cousin. The plan was to cause a disturbance so that Satyendra would pull over and allow the van to pass. When he did, the van blocked him from moving. Dodson shot the unarmed man 8 times at close range. The hitman's description of the events of that day corroborated a neighbor's statement to police. Dodson also told investigators that after the killing, he had returned the white van to Dhinsa's garage on Roosevelt Avenue. He gave the gun back to Dhinsa, who paid him and the driver $20,000 for the hit. On July 6, 1997, police approached the Brooklyn home of Walter Jazz Samuels, the man who Dodson claimed had driven the van.
Samuels.
They arrested him without incident.
New York City Police Department. Keep your head straight ahead.
Police learned that Samuels had a record of previous arrests. With Samuels in custody, investigators turned their attention to Dhinsa. The U.S. Attorney's Office believed agents and detectives now had enough evidence to indict Dhinsa on federal racketeering charges. Special Agent in Charge Kevin Donovan recalls that agents dispersed across the city to find him.
FBI agents and New York City Police Department detectives initiated surveillances at several City Gas Corporation gas stations in which Dhinsa Singh was known to frequent.
At 5 p.m. on July 7, 1997, FBI agents and NYPD detectives followed Dhinsa to his Foster Avenue gas station. When he arrived, they arrested him for murder, kidnapping, pump fraud, and obstruction of justice in aid of a corrupt organization. The entire case hinged on the testimony of Dhinsa's hitman, Marvin Dodson. But because Dodson was a murderer, the U.S. attorney still needed to substantiate his story with other evidence or witness testimony. They hoped that testimony would come from Walter Jazz Samuels, the man who Dodson fingered as his accomplice in the murder of Satyendra Singh. Samuels now told investigators he was not in the van at the time of the shooting. He claimed he was at a nearby restaurant. His story checked out. Investigators believed Samuels knew who drove Dodson on the day of the killing. But he wasn't talking, and neither was Dodson. Investigators needed something else to corroborate Dodson's story. They secured a search warrant for Dhinsa's Roosevelt Avenue gas station, the place where Dodson had returned the white van after the murder. They searched the entire premises, but found little other than stolen license plates. They believed they were probably used on getaway cars during the commission of crimes. But once again, they had no proof. They found nothing that could corroborate Dodson's story or connect Dhinsa to the murder. As the FBI and police continued to pursue evidence, Dhinsa was behind bars once again, pending a July 14th bail hearing. Investigators hoped Dhinsa's incarceration would encourage witnesses to come forward. It did not. As before, Dhinsa continued to rule with an iron hand.
Unfortunately, as a result of Dhinsa Singh's ability to make telephone calls from jail, he was able to continue to run his corporation and his business and to focus on threatening additional individuals who might have come forward to cooperate with the FBI and the New York City Police Department.
For the second time in 3 months, authorities held the suspected murderer behind bars. They hoped it would be his final arrest. But the millionaire hired a high-priced defense team, and the prosecution's entire case still hinged on the testimony of a confessed killer. In July of 1997, a man named Dhinsa had been arrested on federal racketeering charges that included murder and kidnapping to protect his corrupt business empire. It was his second arrest in 3 months. As he had before, Dhinsa directed his business and even threatened potential witnesses from a prison telephone. But this time, investigators were listening. Assistant U.S. Attorney Ben Campbell was not going to let Dhinsa slip through his hands again. They had to keep him behind bars.
First, his conversation was in Punjabi, which is a very unique dialect, and it took us some time before we could find a Punjabi translator to translate those telephone calls. Secondly, he was not very overt in his conversation, so he's somewhat cryptic in his conversation with his colleagues.
The translations opened a rare view into just how tightly Dhinsa held the reins to his empire. Dhinsa attracted customers to his rigged pumps by advertising the lowest gas prices in New York. But his pumps provided less than a gallon for the price.
He was issuing routine instructions to the members of his office, telling them to change the price of gasoline at his various stations, to continue to order supplies for his company. In addition, he also gave them instructions about things to communicate to their attorneys and steps to be taken in order to try and get him out on bail.
As Campbell raced to find evidence to keep Dhinsa from making bail, Police processed the suspect's car. They found business cards that linked Dhinsa to his hitman, Marvin Dodson, and Dodson's operative, Walter Jazz Samuels. Police also recovered a list of names and addresses that appeared to be a hit list. The list included the home address of Sarvjit Singh, a federal witness who had fled the city with his family.
Names, lists,
Balwant Singh, who was under protective custody, had also made the list.
Johnson's phone number, right here.
7 more men with Punjabi names appeared as well. It was just what investigators needed to keep Dhinsa from making bail. While they did not know whether these men were dead or alive, they knew who might. Agents asked Walter Samuels about the list, hoping it would prompt his memory.
Then checking, explain what's going on with that list.
He finally opened up.
And
He said that Dhinsa had planned to kill those 9 men. 2 of them, Balwant and Sarvjit, were federal witnesses. The other 7 were Balwant's family members. They were all still alive. Once again, agents would need to corroborate the story. Confined in the room next door, Marvin Dodson and his lawyer waited to be questioned.
look at, tell me what it means to you.
Dodson confirmed Samuel's story and added something else. He said that on July 3rd, just days before Dhinsa's most recent arrest, Dhinsa had purchased 2 used police cruisers as part of the assassination plan.
Well,
Dodson had copies of the titles, which his lawyer now offered to the agent as proof.
I assume.
Mr. Dhinsa's plan was for Mr. Dodson and Mr. Samuels to pose as law enforcement officers and to stop Balwant Singh on the street along with members of his family and kidnap them and bring them to Mr. Dhinsa at an undisclosed location.
You're going to try to cram all these people in.
Feeling the pressure and hoping to cut a deal, Samuels now told investigators the name of the man who drove the white van during the murder. His name was Evans Alonzo Powell. Because Powell had no arrest record, Dodson wanted to protect him. He had threatened Samuels not to give him up. On July 19, 1997, police arrested Powell on a Brooklyn street. He agreed to cooperate. Powell admitted that he had driven the van for the murder in Queens. Investigators finally had their corroborating witness.
You were driving.
Powell also talked about another crime.
Tell us more about where.
Dhinsa had ordered the murder of the Indian man who had traveled to America to search for his missing brother.
Heard other people talking about on the street.
Powell was present when Dodson killed the attendant at the Brooklyn gas station on the night of March 16, 1997.
Need some oil.
Detective Tony Brizada remembers Dodson's confession.
He admitted shooting him twice in the head, had him kneeling down. And he said he got paid by Singh for doing this. That Singh wanted this person killed. He didn't give him a reason, but he just wanted him killed.
Dhinsa had paid Dodson just $4,000 for taking the man's life. Dodson stole money to pay Powell for being the lookout. Special Agent in charge Kevin Donovan continued to gather evidence about Dhinsa's pump rigging activities.
The FBI and the New York City Police Department executed a search warrant at the Foster Avenue City Gas station. The focus of our search was to identify and obtain evidence of the pump rigging scheme. As a result of the excavation of the area around the pump, electronic devices were located in a box that was used to control the pump rigging scheme.
Investigators determined that Dhinsa manipulated the flow of gasoline to customers' cars through devices controlled by remote. Wired to the pumps and buried underground, the systems could be turned on or off at will. Detective Teddy Braun explains that Dhinsa taught many of his employees when to turn them on and off.
You were taught how to work on remote. And what would happen would be if a person, like for instance, if a person came in for a gallon of gas for their lawnmower, what would happen was the gas attendant would hit a remote in his pocket, which was just like a car alarm remote. And what that would do, it would shut off the skimming system. And the system would go right up to perfect. So that when the gas attendant pumped a gallon worth of gas in a container, it was perfect. So there would be no question.
In late July of 1997, the FBI conducted an exhaustive search of Dhinsa's Brooklyn warehouse headquarters. There they found his double books.
We discovered documents reflecting bribery payments to a corrupt Department of Consumer Affairs inspector. In addition, we also estimate the total value of Mr. Dhinsa's pump fraud activities in the neighborhood of $40 million over 10 years.
By September of 1998, the body of the man abducted from a gas station in the Bronx in 1995 was still missing. But agents had a hunch. Based on New York City construction records at the time of his disappearance, agents suspected that Dhinsa had buried the attendant underneath one of his gas stations.
It was determined that the most likely gas station that was under construction at that time was a gas station located at Farragut and Flatbush Avenue.
On September 16, 1998, investigators arrived at the station with heavy equipment. They employed ground-penetrating radar to help locate the body beneath the earth. They selected two separate sites where they believed the man might be buried.
The construction crew removed slabs of concrete, and the FBI, the New York City Police Department, examined these two sites that were located by the ground-penetrating radar.
Investigators never found the man's body. Though this news was disappointing, investigators were having better luck with other leads. Assistant U.S. Attorney Ben Campbell subpoenaed Dhinsa's cell phone records. They placed Dhinsa at the time and place of Satyendra Singh's murder. Prosecutors were well armed when Dhinsa's trial began in Brooklyn Federal District Court. They hoped to convict him on 29 counts, including capital murder. Savjit Singh, who assisted the investigation despite death threats, testified against the man accused of killing his friends. On March 2, 1999, after 2.5 days of deliberations, the jury found Dhinsa guilty of 21 of the 29 counts. They included murder, attempted murder, and fraud. Dhinsa was acquitted in the kidnapping of the man whose body was never found. On October 5, 1999, Dhinsa received 8 life sentences without possibility of parole. He escaped the death penalty. Later that month, the same judge sentenced Dhinsa's hitmen for their roles in the murders. For assisting in the conviction of Dhinsa, their sentences were considerably lighter. Powell received 10 years, Samuels 12, and Dodson 18. But it was the conviction of Dhinsa that was most satisfying to prosecutors.
Prosecution of Mr. Dhinsa was a very, sort of personally for me, a very rewarding experience. We were able to step into a community that frequently does not turn to law enforcement for assistance, and to render some significant help to them in order to remove an individual who was, for lack of a better term, a plague on that community.
Like many immigrants before him, Dhinsa arrived a poor man and was embraced by a community of compatriots. But he repaid their kindness with swindles and murder. For his greed and brutality, he will never be free again. A Tennessee community is shocked when a beloved elderly woman vanishes. As investigators search, the mystery of her disappearance deepens. The truth begins to emerge, but slowly and in unexpected directions. as police and the FBI try to help a troubled small town find their dear friend.
In 1992, a woman disappeared from her Memphis home. When the ransom went uncollected, the FBI suspected a desperate amateur and feared the worst. I'm Jim Kallstrom, former head of the FBI's New York office. As the search for the woman progressed, investigators uncovered a web of lies and false accusations designed to hide the real perpetrator.
Memphis, Tennessee. On August 7th, 1992, 25 miles outside the city in the small town of Eads, successful land developer Alan Roberts arrived home from work. As usual, his wife's car was in the driveway, but he was surprised to find the mail there.
Doe?
His wife, Doe Roberts, usually left a note when she went out, but there was none.
Doe?
In the kitchen, Alan spotted Doe's asthma medication on the counter. She always took the inhaler when she went out. He called their closest friends nearby.
Bill? Yeah, Bill, this is Alan. Have you seen Doe today? Has she been over there?
No one he spoke to had heard from Doe.
Still not here. I'm a little bit worried, okay? I'll tell you what, I'm gonna go up and look around the property for her. You do me a favor, call around, see if you can find her, okay? Hello?
Roberts worried she might have had an asthma attack while working in the garden. He searched the grounds of their farm. No sign of Doe.
Doe? Doe?
He was about to call the police when his telephone rang.
Hello, Doe?
It was a man speaking with an Asian accent.
You have Doe? What do you mean you have Doe? What do you want?
The caller demanded a $100,000 ransom for Doe's safe return.
Not a problem. I can take care of it. It'll take me a little time. You just let me know what you want me to do, and I'll do it, okay?
But he didn't explain where to take the money
Where do you want me to take it?
before he hung up.
Hello?
Stunned, Alan immediately called the Shelby County Sheriff's Department and told them about his wife's disappearance and the ransom call he received. A team of deputies and sheriff's inspectors responded to the house. Roberts told them he did not recognize the voice of the caller and did not know anyone who would want to harm Doe.
Came back home then about 7:30, 8 o'clock. I woke up.
As the interview continued, agents from the FBI's Memphis field office arrived. Eads is about 30 miles from both the Arkansas and Mississippi borders. If someone took Doe across state lines, the FBI would take the lead, since transporting a victim state to state is a federal crime. Roberts explained he last saw his wife that morning.
So you're planning on working in the
They had
garden
eaten
today?
breakfast together, as they had every morning for 43 years.
Yes, I am. I hope it's not too hot to work.
At 10, Alan left to meet a prospective out-of-town buyer for a property he was developing.
See you later.
All right, have a good day.
All right, bye-bye.
Bye.
The buyer, a man named Sam Wagner, had called the day before, making an appointment to see the property at 10:30 that morning.
Morning, Todd.
Roberts said he waited for over an hour, but Sam Wagner never showed.
Seemed like
He spent the rest of the afternoon laying sod at another of his development properties.
Sure, yeah. If you want to. Okay, want to come in this way?
The investigators needed to check the house for evidence. Roberts showed them Doe's asthma inhaler and said if she suffered a serious attack without it, she could die. They needed to find her immediately. Looking for signs of forced entry, deputies checked doors and windows. Nothing appeared suspicious.
Is it locked?
Knowing that people sometimes run off voluntarily, faking abductions to cover themselves, deputies checked Doe's bedroom. Her suitcases and all of her clothing were still there, as were her valuables. It didn't seem like she left on her own. If someone had abducted her, one clue suggested it happened outside, according to FBI Special Agent Joanne Overall.
Alan Roberts located mail halfway into the garage, and it was not taken into the house. He suspected that his wife had gone to the mailbox and never made it back into the house, and she had laid the mail down at that point.
Beginning at the driveway, deputies formed search lines, fanning out in a grid pattern to scour the 150-acre farm for any sign of the 65-year-old woman or what happened to her. Despite the efforts of multiple search teams, they found nothing. The best chance for a new lead would be additional ransom calls.
Got this hooked up. When he called,
We began monitoring Alan Roberts' phone right after the kidnapping. With his consent, we placed a recorder on his phone should he get a call from the kidnapper.
when the phone rings,
They also installed tracing equipment.
leave it down the whole time you're talking. When you finish, push the
If the man with the Asian accent called again, the FBI would be ready. Later that night, the phone rang.
Hello? Yes?
It was coming from a nearby payphone.
No, just don't hurt her. I'll do whatever you want.
Deputies headed toward the source of the call.
Okay,
It sounded like the same man who called earlier.
okay.
He said Doe was safe, for now, and he knew law enforcement was listening. Robert said the caller ordered him to remove the tape of their conversation and crush it in the driveway.
He wants me to take it outside and smash it. He said he's gonna watch
They
it.
quickly switched it with a blank tape.
All right, go out there and crush it and I'll watch it. Oh, okay.
At that time, no surveillance officers were outside. When Shelby County deputies arrived at the payphone, it was clear. Whoever made the call was gone. By daybreak, investigators expanded their search into the Eads community, asking friends and neighbors when they last saw Doe and if they noticed anything unusual on the day of her disappearance.
Doe and Alan Roberts.
Yeah, sure. They live right over there.
No one recalled seeing or hearing from her that day.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Yes, sir?
One neighbor told investigators that at church that week, there seemed to be tension between Doe and Alan. But no solid clues emerged. Word of the kidnapping spread, and news stations picked up the story. Joe Birch of WMC-TV in Memphis reported on the small community's reaction to Doe's disappearance.
A lot of people felt it must have been someone from the outside who committed this crime. Because these people worshiped together, they went to square dances together, they spent a lot of their time together, and their focus was their little community and staying away from downtown Memphis and all the danger that might be here. So I think the people in the Eads community felt like an outsider probably committed this crime.
But investigators wondered how, in a place like Eads, a stranger wasn't noticed. As the investigation's first full day drew to a close, Special Agent Overall's concern grew. The 24 hours immediately following a kidnapping are critical. As more time passes, the chances of finding the victim alive diminish rapidly. On the second day, community members gathered to show their support and offer prayers for Doe's safe return. While the town of Eads prayed, investigators turned their attention to the most likely suspect.
In a case like this, we always look at the family members and relatives, people that are closest to the victim first, and then work the circle outwards.
They needed to start with the husband, Alan Roberts. It was possible he had harmed Doe, then used an accomplice to make the ransom calls. It is always difficult when family members realize they are suspects. Authorities had to ask the worried husband to take a polygraph test. It was an unexpected request, but Alan agreed. A polygraph measures a subject's physiological reactions while answering questions. The subject reviews all of the questions before the test, so there are no surprises. Though commonly called a lie detector test, a polygraph does not actually detect lies. It only detects whether the subject is exhibiting the characteristics most people exhibit when lying. Spikes in heart rate, perspiration, blood pressure, and respiration.
Are you convinced that I will only ask you questions that we've gone over before?
While polygraph results are rarely admissible in court, many investigators find they point them in the right direction.
Is your first name Alan?
The examiner asked Roberts questions unrelated to the case to establish a baseline for truthful responses. Then he asked questions about his relationship with Doe and the events of the day she disappeared.
Did you kill Doe Roberts?
The examiner then interpreted the graphic output to determine if Roberts appeared to be deceptive on the questions about the case.
All right.
In his opinion, Alan Roberts answered all of the questions truthfully.
You passed?
Alan was sure this was the end of it. But agents knew that test results were not always accurate. They could not eliminate him yet. To check Roberts' story, the FBI wanted to find Sam Wagner, the man he allegedly went to meet on the morning of Doe's abduction.
We thought Sam Wagner may have come into this area, and because of their financial backings and holdings, that he may have kidnapped Doe Roberts for the money that they had, because they had a substantial amount of money.
Agents checked FBI databases and nationwide DMV records, searching for anyone named Sam Wagner. In several states, FBI agents interviewed men of that name, but eliminated each as a suspect.
Alan Roberts' story became more suspicious when Sam Wagner became an unknown individual that we couldn't locate, and it became more apparent to us that Alan Roberts could possibly be behind the kidnapping.
Looks like he checks out. I don't think he's got anything.
If Alan did do something to his wife, perhaps the couple's phone records and banking statements would reveal a clue.
There's nothing unusual about any of the phone calls.
Yet investigators uncovered only evidence of a normal life spent in a small town, with no sign of contact with anyone suspicious, and no record of Doe spending money after August 7th. No leads were panning out. Eventually, they came to believe Doe Roberts was dead.
After approximately 2 to 3 weeks of being unable to locate the victim, it was more than likely going to end up being a homicide. I requested through my supervisor that we bring in Shelby County Sheriff's Department into the investigation to make it a joint investigation.
If it were a murder, it would be prosecuted in state court. The team returned to the Roberts house.
The second search of Alan Roberts' property was done more in a forensic frame of mind, and we were looking for blood spatterings in the house as well as in the barn.
Again, Roberts cooperated. He would do anything. Forensics technicians from the FBI and the Sheriff's Department processed the buildings, looking for any evidence of a murder, cleanup, or disposal of a body. They also gathered hairs and carpet fibers from Alan's truck to compare to any evidence recovered later. The painstaking search lasted 2 full days. Alan Roberts grew more frustrated that law enforcement had to devote so much time to him as a suspect. He was wearing down, and the real kidnapper was out there, somewhere. In 1992, the Shelby County Sheriff's Department and the Memphis FBI searched Alan Roberts' farm and its buildings for any sign of his wife's possible murder. Roberts had passed a polygraph, and now none of the items on his property tested positive for blood. Yet no other suspects emerged, and investigators had developed circumstantial evidence that implicated Roberts. Although several witnesses had seen Roberts that day, his confirmed alibi only accounted for about 5 hours. Authorities knew that left plenty of time to get rid of a body. Also, some members of the Eads community gave statements claiming Alan Roberts had acted in a suspicious manner following Doe's disappearance, according to Special Agent Joanne Overall.
People within the community felt he did not openly grieve for the loss of his wife. He was socializing shortly after her kidnapping, that both him and his wife were members of a square dancing group, and within a couple of weeks, Alan was back at the square dancing group with various partners.
News anchor Joe Birch observed Roberts' lack of emotion during media coverage.
When somebody's wife disappears, you'd expect to see a level of emotion, and we just didn't see it from Alan Roberts. He was just kind of calm, cool, and collected, and very direct, and there wasn't a lot of teary-eyed, emotional appeals that we see a lot in kidnapping cases.
Investigators kept watching Roberts as he tried to carry on with his life, struggling with the frustration of not knowing where his wife was and being the only suspect in her disappearance. Yet they saw nothing that led them to Doe Roberts. In September, the man with the Asian accent resurfaced, now saying Alan was involved.
The kidnapper began calling people in the Eads community, stating that Doe Roberts was still alive. Many of the phone calls indicated Alan was part of the scheme to kidnap his wife. It was extremely frustrating because he never gave specific points to drop money.
Several of the people who talked to the kidnapper had caller IDs on their phones, so agents traced the calls to phone booths on a well-traveled road.
We would go to the phone booths immediately, and of course, the individual who was making the phone call was already gone. Other people had already used the phone. We would check the phones for possible fingerprints, and there was just never any evidence to tie an individual to that phone.
Here?
Each of the calls were made within a few miles of the Roberts house, a significant risk in a small community buzzing about the case. This boldness suggested that the caller was an insider, familiar enough to be inconspicuous in public, and that he considered himself beyond the reach of investigators. Desperate for something solid, Alan Roberts took things into his own hands, offering a reward for Doe's safe return and announcing he disconnected the FBI's recording and tracing equipment from his phone so the kidnapper could call freely. On October 8, 1992, 2 months after Doe disappeared, the kidnapper called Alan Roberts again.
Is she okay?
He told him to drive to a payphone at a country store a mile away. Now. Roberts hurried to the store. Once again, he was on his own, with no corroborating witness to prove what was happening. The phone was already ringing when he arrived. He hoped, finally, this would be his chance to get his wife back.
Hello?
2 months after someone abducted 65-year-old Doe Roberts, the kidnapper ordered her husband, Alan Roberts, to a payphone.
Hello? Hello?
The man with the Asian accent said Doe was alive and still with him. He asked Roberts for the name of an intermediary, someone Alan trusted that the kidnapper could contact.
Somebody at the church? What do you mean, somebody at the church?
Roberts suggested Charles Lord, a leading church member and friend of the family. The caller said he would be in touch about where to bring the ransom money.
Can I talk to Doe? Please, let me talk to Doe. What? Hello?
Then he hung up.
Well, they've been good neighbors.
Charles Lord, the man Roberts picked to be his intermediary, was a civil servant and treasurer of the local church. He made a public appeal to the kidnapper on Alan Roberts' behalf, asking the man to call him and finally give specific instructions for a ransom drop.
Call my number, and I'll line up how to get.
They all wanted to get Doe back.
There you go.
More calls from the kidnapper came to Charles Lord and others in the community, but still no details for an exchange. In November 1992, Charles Lord called investigators to his home. Special Agent Joanne Overall hoped they finally had a direct link to the kidnapper.
Charles Lord stated that late in the evening he heard a car out on his cove. He walked down to the mailbox and there was a letter placed in his mailbox, which was a kidnapping ransom letter.
Investigators were glad to have physical evidence. Fingerprints, hairs of fibers on the letter might provide a link to the kidnapper. But by the time they got to it, they found the evidence tainted.
Charles Lord took this letter and showed it to several people before we were called in and obtained the letter. So there was quite a few fingerprints on the letter before we got it.
Lab examiners checked all of the prints, determining they belonged to Lord and the people he let handle the letter. Nothing to lead them to the kidnapper. The message was no help either. The ransom had been lowered, but still, no instructions for a drop. It seemed the kidnapper was playing games with them. In case he contacted Lord again, agents set a trap.
Our office set up surveillance on his mailbox using a hidden camera, which was literally placed in a birdhouse close to the mailbox.
If the kidnapper dropped off another note, they'd have him on tape. Agents also installed wiretap and recording devices on Lord's telephone.
Basically, what
They still had no real evidence against Alan Roberts. But a new suspect was developing.
Yes, sir. Come on in.
Charles Lord began taking an active role in the investigation, often stopping by the sheriff's office to check on their progress.
The Roberts, Joe Roberts.
Yes, sir. Roberts.
The deputies became suspicious.
Wanted to come by and
He seemed too interested. Their suspicion deepened because of the peculiar nature of the phone calls he claimed he got from the kidnapper.
Charles Lord stated he received several phone calls from the kidnapper. He did say that he talked with Doe Roberts, which was unusual because none of the other callers talked with Doe Roberts.
Appreciate it.
But agents never got tapes of the calls.
But every time he received a telephone call, it appeared that our equipment didn't work.
Over the next week, Lord reported another ransom letter and one of Doe's scarves placed in his mailbox. Agents recovered no evidence from the items, but hoped their camera captured images of the kidnapper. They had plenty of the regular mail carrier. But when the tape got to where the kidnapper should appear, it went blank.
When the equipment that was placed at Charles Lord's residence continued to fail, I just thought we had poor equipment. Eventually, it became apparent that somebody was tampering with it.
Agents suspected the interference came from Charles Lord. Then the victim's husband, Alan Roberts, reported a strange encounter with Lord. He said the night before, at the Eads Community Center, Lord summoned him to a private meeting. Alan was surprised when his friend offered to help get Doe back for a price.
Alan Roberts told me that Charles Lord had advised that he had underworld contacts and that there was information available if Charles could get some money to pay for it. Also, Alan advised at that time that Charles Lord was wearing a gun.
It was clear Lord was somehow involved. But investigators needed more than suspicion. They needed evidence. On March 4th, 1993, 7 months after Doe disappeared, there was another twist in the case. Memphis news anchor Joe Birch received a call at his office.
I've never recorded a telephone conversation before, but I decided that I would record this conversation. The call set off a trigger in my mind that this could be the same individual who's been making the anonymous calls in the Doe Roberts case, and I tried to get the man to stay on the line for as long as he would stay.
As Birch spoke to the man with the Asian accent, he tried to elicit details as to who the caller was and what happened to Doe. When Birch tried to set up a ransom drop, the caller hung up.
Hello? Hello? I took the tape directly into my boss's office. We immediately called the FBI and the Shelby County Sheriff's Department.
What can you tell us about Doe Roberts?
Investigators agreed to WMC-TV airing the tape, hoping it might flush the kidnapper out. It worked.
News 5, can we help you?
The kidnapper called back. He was angry they aired the tape and demanded no more coverage. But this time, Joe Birch got him to do what no one else had. Arrange a ransom drop. Agents and sheriff's inspectors staked out the drop location, ready to grab the caller who had eluded them for so long.
Is that her?
That's her.
You could be a positive.
Yeah.
As instructed, a reporter from WMC-TV drove to the spot with $80,000 in cash.
It's her, but I don't see anybody else. Do you see anybody else?
Everyone waited, hoping.
Sit tight. Sit tight. We may have somebody else. They may
But the kidnapper never showed.
She's leaving. Okay.
It didn't happen.
One more disappointment in a frustrating investigation.
1909, be advised, subject has just left. No contact. Show us going ahead and clearing the scene.
Other deputies observed Charles Lord was home the entire time. Weeks passed with no movement on the case. Then, in June 1993, the kidnapper arranged another drop. He called two of Doe's nephews and told them to bring the ransom money to a local motel. Soon, the elusive kidnapper finally would surface. In June 1993, investigators working the Doe-Roberts kidnapping staked out an Eads, Tennessee motel. Special Agent Joanne Overall was part of the surveillance.
Doe-Roberts' nephews received a call from the kidnapper, and they tried to make an arranged ransom drop. They were told to go to a motel room, which they did, but they also called the FBI. They were waiting to get a phone call or meet with somebody.
Other surveillance deputies had been unable to find suspect Charles Lord that night. As the team at the motel watched, a man approached. It was Lord. He went to the room the nephews had rented.
Charles Lord told the nephews of Doe-Roberts that he had received a call from the kidnapper and that he was to show up there and get the money, and he would receive a phone call as to where to take the money.
But the nephews wouldn't give him the cash. They said they wanted to deal with the kidnapper directly. Investigators were sure that was exactly who they were dealing with.
He is the only individual who had received a telephone call stating that he had talked with Doe-Roberts, and now he was meeting with somebody to pick up money, but we did not have enough evidence at that time to go forward with an arrest.
They did, however, increase their focus on Lord. To look for a financial motive to the kidnapping, the FBI subpoenaed Lord's bank records.
We went through records trying to determine if he had loans out, what his financial holdings were, and it became apparent that Charles Lord owed a lot of money to several banks in town, substantial amounts of money, and that he was unable to meet the payments and that he had filed for bankruptcy.
That circumstantial evidence allowed investigators to secure a search warrant for Lord's house. In late June 1993, they served the warrant, which allowed them to look for and seize any financial documents. Some of the files they recovered revealed Lord's criminal past.
He had embezzled over $150,000 from the Memphis depot, where he had retired several years prior, and he had embezzled approximately $70,000 from the church there in Eads, where he was attending.
As treasurer of the church, Lord had access to the parish bank accounts and cash donations. Despite the find, investigators still had no direct evidence of the abduction.
We had nothing that we could use to charge him with the kidnapping and the murder of Doe-Roberts. It was important to obtain a confession from Charles Lord because we had no body.
Good, maybe this will help us out a little bit.
One agent working the case was trained in criminal profiling.
He wants some more attention.
Analyzing Lord's actions, he offered a behavioral profile to help get the confession.
We have here, we got all these files. Is he going to repeat his...
He suggested Lord was a manipulative, pathological liar who believed he was untouchable.
gonna help us out, but I don't know if it's gonna...
The agent felt that overwhelming the suspect's ego was the only way to beat him.
What you guys need to do is let
The
him...
plan was to bring Lord in for an interview and let him see what he would take to be evidence of a massive investigation against him for months.
Push into just confessing.
Agents created numerous evidence boxes, hoping to trump Lord's belief he was above the investigation. Then, on August 25th, 1993, at the FBI's Memphis field office, investigators met with Lord and his attorney.
I got some questions about... Do you know anything about Mrs. Doe Roberts?
As Charles Lord sat in that room during the interview, I was watching him look at these boxes, realizing that he had been under surveillance for a lot longer than he had anticipated, and he became very nervous.
The FBI's tactics appeared to be working. Lord eventually admitted to making some of the ransom calls. He said he did it to keep the investigation alive for Doe's sake, but denied any involvement in her abduction. Sensing that he was ready to crack, the investigators offered him a deal.
Charles Lord was told by our office, as well as the Shelby County inspector, that if he would take a polygraph and pass a polygraph, we would not look at him any further for the Doe Roberts kidnapping. However, if he failed the polygraph, his attorney and Charles Lord agreed to a further interrogation in reference to the kidnapping.
He agreed. After asking control questions to gauge Lord's truthful response levels, the polygraph examiner asked about Doe, including whether Lord was involved in her abduction.
Did you harm Doe Roberts?
In the end, the examiner believed the polygraph results showed Lord being deceptive. Though the results could not be used in court, they meant authorities could continue questioning the suspect. With Lord's attorney present in the interrogation room, FBI agents and inspectors from the Shelby County Sheriff's Department pressed the suspect, returning again and again to the polygraph results.
I've got every piece of evidence I need, what I need you to do.
At first, he continued to deny involvement, but after several hours, the interview tactics wore him down. Lord said he was ready to tell them what happened. He said he needed cash to pay back his loans and cover the money he stole from the church, and decided to kidnap Doe for ransom. On August 6, 1992, he called the Roberts, posing as a property buyer named Sam Wagner, and arranged to meet Alan. The next day, when he knew Alan was waiting at the development property, he drove by their house. Doe was bringing in the mail.
Doe, there's been an accident.
He knew she would trust him.
Alan's been involved in an accident. Yeah, get in the car and I'll take you to him.
What happened? Do you know? Is he all right?
Lord told investigators he planned to release Doe after he got the ransom, but she suffered a fatal heart attack in his car. He said he panicked and dumped her body and her purse, but he would not say where.
Would you be willing to take us to where she is?
The investigators believed he was lying, at least about planning to release Doe, and perhaps about other details.
You did what you were supposed to do.
Special Agent Joanne Overall knew they had to find the body to check his story. They offered a deal.
Charles Lord agreed to tell us where Doe Roberts' body was after he had confessed to the kidnapping in exchange for Shelby County not pursuing the death penalty.
Lord claimed he dumped her in the Wolf River, a slow-moving river that runs 90 miles across the southwest corner of the state. The Wolf River empties into the Mississippi at Memphis. Lord said he dumped the remains from a bridge in Fayette County, 13 miles from the Roberts' home. Divers would begin 50 yards upriver, searching for the body and purse. Lieutenant John Yancey of the Shelby County Sheriff's Department led the dive in the murky river.
We had 21 divers involved total. The visibility in the river was 0. It was total black water.
And in the dark water, several species of venomous snakes. Adding to the challenge was the fact that the crime took place a year earlier. Any remains would be scattered and difficult to find. FBI agents and sheriff's deputies helped the divers by stretching a rope across the river's width. Divers held onto the rope and moved across its length, searching the river bottom by hand.
Normally you do an arm span, arm over arm for a search for a body because it's large. But we were looking for contents of the purse at the time to try to make sure that this was actually the scene. So we had to bring it down to where we were, instead of doing the large arm spans, we were having to do what I call this the hand grab. And that's where you just get the dirt with your hand, and that way you're able to find everything on the bottom.
Once the divers reached the other bank, the team would move the rope a foot downriver and start over. Anytime a diver found something, he signaled, and additional divers came in to mark and extract the item.
We found a safe that had been taken in a robbery of a cleaner's, and the money had fallen out of the safe, and we found the pennies on the bottom and the dollar bills, but we found no contents of any of her purse. So I feel like if we'd have found pennies on the bottom, we would have found her makeup or a wallet or IDs or anything times back to her.
In 110-degree heat, the team continued their search of every square inch.
On my second day, I was on the bridge, and an elderly lady walked up to me and said, "I want you to do me a favor." And I said, "I'll try to if I can." She said, "I want you to find us something today so we can get this over with, so we can go ahead and bury Doe and get this case over with."
After 3 full days, they had searched a half-mile of the river. They believed the body would not have gone farther than that in the lowland waters.
I went to my boss, my chief, and I told him, I said, based on my experience and what we have done, she's not in here. But if you want us to continue to search, we'll search till it runs into Mississippi, ever how you want to do it. But I can tell you right now, she's not here.
Investigators were convinced Lord had lied to them, unnecessarily placing the dive team in danger. Special Agent Overall confronted Lord.
We took Charles Lord out to the site and explained to him that these divers were putting their lives in jeopardy and we needed to find the body, and it didn't appear that the body was there.
The suspect had run out of lies. Now he was ready to tell investigators what really happened to Doe Roberts. After a 3-day search of Tennessee's Wolf River, dive leader Lieutenant John Yancey believed the remains of kidnapping victim Doe Roberts were not in the river.
We had searched everywhere possible, and just over the years of experience, I would have found something by now, either some bones, some makeup, or something. I said, based on my experience, she's not in here. There the divers are, she's not there.
Investigators confronted suspect Charles Lord.
The deal's gonna come off the table.
Realizing they would not give up until they got the truth, Lord admitted Doe had not died of a heart attack in his car.
They've searched the water.
He said he took her to his house and tied her up in a room above the garage. He could never let his neighbor go, now. He tried to kill her with sleeping pills. When that didn't work, he smothered her with a pillow.
In my backyard.
Lord said he buried her in his backyard compost heap. On top of the body, he placed a layer of lime, then concrete, hoping they would hasten decomposition. They needed to determine if Lord was telling the truth this time, to retrieve evidence and give Doe's family the closure of knowing what happened.
Stand by.
The sheriff's department called in forensic anthropologists from the University of Tennessee. After removing layers of leaves and compost, they began the dig. Shelby County Sheriff's Lieutenant Ronald Goodwin supervised the meticulous excavation.
It's just using brushes and little trowels, much like uncovering artifacts. And it's one spoonful at a time to make sure that you don't miss any evidence and make sure you don't do anything to harm what evidence may be with the body.
After 2 hours, they pierced a shell of concrete and lime. In the space underneath, a body.
Well, the first thing that we came to was a hand. The rest of the body was laying flat in the grave site on its back, face up.
It took 17 hours to completely exhume the remains, and what investigators found surprised them.
The skin was intact. The body was in such good condition, I felt like the many scientific tests that we could run might reveal. It's poisoning, cause of death, sexual attack, or whatever. It appeared that the actions that Mr. Lord had taken, such as the lime and so forth on top of the body, had worked in reverse, and it had preserved the body for us.
The most chilling detail was the position of the 65-year-old woman's hand.
The only thing that was out of normal position was the hand, which was up in front of her face in a defensive position with the finger spread.
It appeared to investigators she might not have been dead when she was buried.
Maybe she was still alive. Maybe she was pushing up with her hand.
Over a year after Doe Roberts disappeared, the FBI and Alan Roberts had their evidence. On October 19, 1993, Charles Lord pled guilty to first-degree murder and kidnapping. He was sentenced to life plus 25 years. Doe's husband, Alan, had endured being a suspect for months. Now, with the truth out, he could finally lay Doe to rest. But one challenge remains for Alan Roberts.
It's an uneven closure. I'm trying to forget about Charles Lord, and I'm praying that God will let me forgive him. I'm praying that Doe is in God's hands right now.
Mr. and Mrs. Roberts enjoyed 43 years of marriage before they were torn apart. He has faith that one day he will see her again.